The reading room at Harrington and Co. felt suffocating, packed with 23 family members in a space meant for 10. Tension hung in the air like storm clouds ready to burst. My father, Richard, sat in the front row, his navy suit crisp and impeccable, glancing at his watch every few seconds as if he had more important matters waiting. Beside him, my mother, Evelyn, clutched her handbag tightly, knuckles pale, her gaze fixed on me with silent judgment since the funeral. "This is taking too long," Dad muttered to his lawyer. "I have a board meeting at 3. Even at the reading of his own mother's will, he couldn't escape work. That was Richard for you. A man who knew the cost of everything but the worth of nothing." Uncle Thomas leaned against the wall, his broad frame taking up space for 2. The eldest of Grandma's 3 sons, he had inherited her height but none of her wisdom. His wife, Clarissa, barely half his age, sat beside him, filing her nails with a bored expression. She'd only known Grandma for half a year, yet here she was, ready to claim her share. 50 million, Thomas whispered to his brother Michael. "Even after taxes, we're looking at least 15 million each." Michael, the youngest, had spent most of his adult life chasing quick wins, from business schemes to card tables, perpetually one step away from ruin. His ex-wife, seated with their teenage kids, observed quietly. Everyone was eager for their slice of Margaret Whitman's estate. The side seats were crowded with cousins, distant relatives, and strangers who had somehow found their way there. Someone's boyfriend even took notes on his phone, already plotting investments. The sight made my stomach churn. "Where is Mr. Harrington?" Dad barked, cutting through the murmurs. "This is unprofessional." The door opened, and at 72, Charles Harrington walked in, carrying a leather folder. He moved slowly, deliberately. The ease of a man who had learned time was his ally. He had been Grandma's attorney for 4 decades, watching her build her shipping empire from scratch, guiding her through every triumph and setback. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but when his eyes met mine, a silent understanding passed between us. Neither pity nor sorrow, just recognition. "Thank you all for attending," Charles began, placing the folder on the podium. "Before we proceed, I must remind everyone that Margaret Whitman's will is carefully drafted and legally binding. Any challenges will be met with the full force of the law," Dad scoffed. "Just get on with it, Charles. We all know why we're here." Charles nodded, maintaining his composure. "Very well. The last will and testament of Margaret Whitman, executed 6 months before her passing." The room fell silent, everyone holding their breath. This was the moment they had waited for, the payout to settle debts, fund ambitions, and satisfy greed. But I wasn't thinking about money. My mind lingered on Grandma's warmth, her wisdom, her unwavering hands that had guided us all. 3 weeks had passed, and the memory of her felt almost weightless, like she was already halfway to somewhere beyond reach. I thought about the last sunset we watched together from her bedroom, how the light had caught the tears on her cheeks when she told me she was proud of me. None of the others had ever been there for moments like that, not one of them. Charles Harrington opened the folder and drew out the first document. The papers looked official, dense with authority, but I could see there was more, several sealed envelopes tucked inside, waiting. His fingers lingered for a heartbeat on the last envelope, and when he looked up, his gaze met mine. Clearing his throat and adjusting his glasses, he began to read. The words made it clear immediately that Grandma Margaret had arranged something no one expected. She had never followed the usual path, and certainly wouldn't end with anything conventional. 3 years ago, I was just another construction foreman in Portland, managing crews on commercial projects and returning each night to a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of whatever my neighbor was cooking. My day started at 5 a.m. with black coffee and blueprints, and ended at 7 p.m. with a beer and a game on TV. It was simple, predictable, and I liked it that way. My relationship with my family had always been incomplete, like a puzzle with missing pieces. My father, Richard Whitman, was a high-powered investment banker who moved us from Portland to New York when I was 15, only to relocate back when I turned 18, leaving me to navigate college alone. He sent money, yes, but never his presence. Our conversations lasted only long enough for him to ensure I wasn't embarrassing the family name. "You're doing construction," he said once when I mentioned my job, even with a business degree in hand. "I like building things that last," I replied. He hung up without saying goodbye. That had been 2 years before Grandma became ill. My mother, Evelyn, was another story. She had married Dad for his name and the social status it brought. Her days were spent at the country club organizing events for causes she couldn't name and appearing in society pages. Sometimes, when I was young, she would look at me as if she had forgotten I existed, like an accessory she had purchased and misplaced. My uncles were their own brand of disappointment. Thomas, the eldest, had burned through 3 marriages and half a dozen businesses, each collapse more dramatic than the last. He had a way of selling certainty that never lasted. Michael, the youngest, lived life as if it were an endless weekend in Las Vegas, calling maybe once a year with a small favor he would never repay. Then came that October morning that changed everything. I was reviewing permits when my phone rang. Seeing Margaret Whitman's name made me step outside. "Garrett, dear." Her voice held something unusual, a patient urgency I hadn't heard before. "I need to see you. Can you come by this weekend?" "Of course, Grandma." "Everything okay?" "We'll talk when you arrive." The drive to Cannon Beach normally took 2 hours, but I made it in 90 minutes. Her oceanfront mansion sat majestically on a bluff, overlooking the Pacific. 28 rooms of timber and glass, built in 1995 after her business went international. Yet when I arrived, she wasn't in any of the grand spaces I had expected. I found her in the kitchen, brewing tea the way she always had, calm as if the world hadn't shifted beneath her feet. "Pancreatic cancer," she said quietly, handing me a steaming cup. "Stage 4. Doctors say I may have 18 months if I'm lucky." The mug burned my palms, but I held it anyway, needing something to ground me. "What about treatment?" "Second opinions." "There has to be options," I asked. "I'll fight it," she replied, settling across from me at the small breakfast table where she had fed me pancakes every Sunday as a child. "But I need someone by my side, someone I trust. Your father is already calling about power of attorney. Your uncles are circling like predators. I need someone who cares about me, not my money." "I'll move in tomorrow," I said without hesitation. "Richard, my job, my life in Portland, none of that matters. You're my family, Grandma, my real family. The work will still be there when I return." She reached across the table, taking my hand. Her fingers felt fragile, almost like bird bones, yet her grip remained firm. "You know what I remember most about you?" she said. "When you were 7, there was a boy at your school, Timothy something. His father had lost his job and he stopped bringing lunch. You gave him your lunch money every day for a month. Came home hungry, never a word about it. I only learned because Timothy's mother called to thank me for raising such a kind boy." "I didn't know you knew about that," I said. "Mothers know, sweetheart. Grandmothers know even more," she said softly. "That's when I realized you understood what truly matters. Not money or status, but showing up for someone who needs you." That night, I called my boss and arranged for indefinite leave. I packed my apartment in 6 hours. By the next evening, I was unpacking in one of Grandma's guest rooms, ready for whatever came next. Neither of us knew that the following 18 months would bring revelation, heartbreak, and the ultimate test of what family truly means. The first sign of trouble came a week after I moved in. Richard's sleek black Mercedes rolled into the driveway at 8 in the morning, and he walked in unannounced, carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents. "Mother, we need to discuss your assets," he said, barely glancing at me at the breakfast table. "With your diagnosis, it's important to protect the estate from tax complications." Margaret set down her coffee carefully. "Richard, I haven't seen you in 6 months, and the first words out of your mouth aren't even a greeting." "This is urgent," he insisted, spreading papers across the table. Sign here, here, and here. Just moving some assets into protected trusts, standard procedure. She picked up one document, read it thoroughly, then slid them all back toward him. These trusts would give you immediate control of my accounts. Someone needs to manage them if I become incapacitated, he said. I have cancer, Richard, not dementia, she said calmly, and I have Charles for all legal matters. Now, would you like breakfast with your son and me, or did you come all this way just to try to take what isn't yours? His face flushed. I'm trying to help you, he muttered. No, you're trying to help yourself. There's a difference. A lesson I taught you long ago, though apparently it didn't stick. He grabbed his papers and stormed out. From the window, I watched him make a phone call before driving away. Within the hour, Evelyn rang Margaret's landline. Margaret, dear, Mom's syrupy voice oozed through the receiver. Richard's only concerned. Margaret set the phone down without a word, the corner of her mouth curling in a knowing smile. Perhaps I should come visit, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with false concern. I can help with arrangements. You haven't set foot in this house in 2 years, Grandma Margaret replied coolly. Don't start pretending to care now. The line went dead. She turned to me, a sad smile on her lips. Garrett, she said softly, the vultures can smell it. Watch how quickly they circle. She was right. Over the next 3 months, their attempts grew bolder. Thomas showed up one night, reeking of bourbon, pounding on the door at midnight. I need 50,000, he bellowed when I answered. My restaurant's failing. She's sitting on millions while you're losing everything, I said. Go home, Thomas. You're drunk, you little leech, I snapped. He jabbed a finger at my chest. Playing the good grandson, while we all know you're waiting for your payday. How much is she promising you? 10%, 20. I'm here because I love her, I said. Love. He spat the word as though it were venom. Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't save failing businesses. Now get her down here or I'm coming in. I stood firm in the doorway. We stared at each other, nephew and uncle, divided by principle and greed. Finally, he stepped back. This isn't over, he muttered. That money belongs to her sons, not some charity case. The worst part? Grandma had heard everything. I found her sitting by her bedroom window, tears streaking her cheeks. Did I fail them that badly? She whispered. How did my boys become such strangers? Michael's approach was different, but just as cruel. He hired a psychiatrist to evaluate Margaret, claiming she wasn't competent to manage her own affairs. One Tuesday afternoon, the doctor arrived unannounced. I'm here for Margaret Whitman's cognitive assessment, he announced. Margaret stood in the doorway, frail but unyielding. Young man, I built a shipping empire from nothing, negotiated with unions and government officials, and ran board meetings until last year. I can still beat anyone in this house at chess, recite Shakespeare from memory, and balance my own checkbook. Now get off my property before I call the police and my attorney. The doctor left, but Michael didn't stop. He called Adult Protective Services, claiming I was taking advantage of a vulnerable elder. The investigation was humiliating for Margaret, forcing her to prove to strangers that she was living at home by choice. Meanwhile, her health deteriorated. Chemotherapy left her weak. Some days she couldn't leave the bed. I learned to manage her medications, change IV bags, and help her to the bathroom. The work was exhausting, but the emotional toll was heavier. Watching this extraordinary woman, who had built an empire and raised a family, reduced to hoping one of her children would visit without ulterior motives, was heartbreaking. Evelyn sent flowers every month with identical cards, thinking of you. Get well soon, Vera. No visits, no phone calls, just flowers that Grandma often asked me to donate to the hospital. At least someone will enjoy them, she said. The betrayals piled up like a suffocating winter storm, each one breaking Margaret's heart a little more. I worried she might die of disappointment before the cancer took her. Yet through it all she kept planning, meeting with Charles Harrington, making arrangements she wouldn't discuss with me. 6 months before her passing, everything changed. On a grey February morning, Charles's Lincoln town car pulled into the driveway. He carried a thick leather portfolio and a recording device. His face set with determination. "Garrett," Grandma said, already dressed in her best navy suit despite rarely leaving bed anymore, "I need you to give us privacy." Charles and I had matters to go over, and they locked themselves in Margaret's study for 4 hours. From the hallway, I could hear the shuffle of papers, the scratch of pens across documents, Charles's steady voice asking questions, and Grandma's clear, measured responses. When they finally emerged, Charles looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your grandmother is extraordinary, Garrett," he said, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Remember, the months ahead may be challenging, but trust the process." After he left, I found Margaret in the study, gazing out at the ocean. Several documents were scattered across her desk, but she quickly gathered them and slid them into a locked drawer. "What was all that about?" I asked. "Insurance," she said simply. "Making sure the right things happen for the right reasons." Over the next few weeks, she seemed invigorated by whatever she and Charles had arranged. She began documenting everything: missed visits, manipulative phone calls, and attempts to access her money. She had me install a recording system for the house phone, strictly legal, she said, for medical emergencies, with a wink. The recordings revealed more than either of us had imagined. Richard calling her doctor, trying to get information on her mental state. Michael attempting to bribe her housekeeper Maria for copies of financial statements. Thomas on a 3-way call with his brothers, plotting to contest any will that didn't give them equal shares. "The old woman won't last much longer," Thomas said on one recording. "We just need to make sure the boy doesn't manipulate her into anything foolish." "I've got my lawyer ready," Richard added. "The second she passes, we freeze everything. Garrett won't touch a cent." Grandma listened with me, her expression steady but her hand trembling as she took notes. "They're not even pretending anymore," she said softly. "At least now I know where we all stand." Her health declined sharply. The cancer had spread to her liver and bones, and hospice care arrived in mid-April. I took complete leave from work, sleeping on a cot in her room to be near her at night. Those last weeks were both brutal and beautiful. We talked through long nights when pain kept her awake, about her childhood during the Depression, eating flour soup, wearing shoes made of cardboard, how she started her shipping company with a single truck and a fisherman who believed in her. Her first million and how she celebrated it alone, her husband gone and her sons too young to understand. "I wanted to give them everything I never had," she said one night, her voice dreamy from morphine. "But somewhere along the way I gave them everything except what mattered. Values, compassion, the understanding that money is a tool, not a goal." 2 weeks before she passed, she took my hand with surprising strength. "Garrett, promise me something," she said. "When Charles reads the will, no matter what happens, don't defend me. Don't explain my choices. Let them react. Let them show exactly who they are." "Grandma, what did you do?" I whispered. "I'm setting things right, or as right as I can now. Just promise me you won't interfere. Let Charles handle it." "I promise," I said. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen in weeks. "You're going to be all right, Garrett," Margaret had told me once. "Better than all right. You'll learn what real wealth truly means." Her funeral was set for a Thursday. She passed on a Monday evening, watching the sunset turn the ocean gold and pink. Her final words were calm, deliberate. "The truth always surfaces, Garrett. Like oil on water, it rises to the top. Watch for it." The obituary ran in 3 newspapers. Within hours, distant relatives I hadn't even heard of began calling about funeral arrangements. Richard flew in from New York the next morning, already dressed in black, already calculating. Evelyn arrived separately, ensuring society photographers captured her every tear. Thomas and Michael came together, presenting a united front of entitlement. At the funeral, they all performed flawlessly. Richard's eulogy about family values and maternal love would have been touching if I hadn't heard him call her a stubborn old fool just a week earlier. The tears, the shared memories, the anecdotes, all of it felt hollow. Charles Harrington announced the will reading for the following week. The vultures circled immediately, but I stayed patient, trusting Margaret's plan. The conference room at Charles Harrington's law office felt like a stage set for a play about greed. Every chair was taken, and people lined the walls, afraid to miss a word. Richard sat at the front with his personal lawyer, a sharp-faced woman who constantly checked her tablet. Evelyn brought her financial advisor, a nervous man adjusting his tie. Thomas cracked his knuckles, and Michael sweated through his shirt despite the air conditioning. Charles arrived precisely at 2:00, carrying the same leather portfolio from 6 months prior. He placed it on the podium, adjusted his glasses, and surveyed the room with the steady gaze of a man who had seen every type of family drama in 4 decades. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "I want to remind everyone that Margaret Whitman executed this will 6 months ago, in full mental capacity, witnessed by 3 medical professionals and 2 independent attorneys. Any attempts to contest it will be met with the full resources of this firm." Richard's lawyer started to speak, but Charles raised a hand. "All questions will be addressed after the reading." He opened the portfolio and drew out the first document, the last will and testament of Margaret Whitman, dated February 15th of this year. Charles began. "To my son, Richard Whitman, I leave my complete collection of family photographs stored in albums in the study. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family gathering you missed while building your fortune. Perhaps reviewing them will help you understand what you traded for your success." Richard's expression shifted from expectation to confusion, then to fury in seconds. "Photos." That was it. Charles continued without acknowledging him. "To my son, Thomas Whitman, I leave my personal recipe book, containing the meals you claimed you could improve but never once cooked for me. May you finally learn that talking about doing something and actually doing it are very different." Thomas stood abruptly, his chair tipping backward. "This is insane. Where's the money?" "To my son, Michael Whitman," Charles read on, "I leave my antique deck of playing cards, the same deck my father used to teach me that gambling with family love is the only bet you're guaranteed to lose." Michael's face went red as the room absorbed the weight of her final lessons. "She's mocking us." "This whole thing is a joke," Richard shouted. Charles Harrington remained calm. "To my daughter-in-law Evelyn Whitman," he read steadily, "I leave my collection of costume jewelry, 23 pieces that appear valuable but are worth nothing." "Much like the affection you showed me over the years," Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to the real pearls at her neck. "How dare she?" The room erupted. Voices rose, threats and accusations flying like shards of glass. Charles waited patiently until the noise subsided, then pulled out a second envelope. "To my grandson, Garrett Whitman," he continued, "I leave my 1947 Cadillac coupe, purchased with the first profit from my business. It still runs because it was cared for, not bought. Like love, it only needed consistent attention to last." All eyes turned to me, hatred blazing so intense it could have burned steel. "That's it," Richard bellowed. "Where's the 46 million? The mansion, the shipping company, the investments?" Charles calmly pulled out a thick document. "Ah, yes. The estate valued at 46 million. I have here a complete financial disclosure. Also executed 6 months ago." The room fell silent, the tension so thick I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. 3 years ago," Charles continued, "upon receiving her diagnosis, Margaret Whitman began liquidating her assets. She sold the shipping company to her employees for $1, with the provision that all profits for the next decade go into their retirement funds. She liquidated all investment portfolios and properties, converting everything to cash. 46 million in cash," Thomas whispered. "Where is it?" Charles smiled, the first real emotion he'd shown. "Distributed as follows. 30 million established the Whitman Foundation for Childhood Cancer Research, focusing on pancreatic cancer in children. 8 million funded full college scholarships for 200 first-generation students from working families. 5 million was distributed among 15 food banks and homeless shelters across Oregon and Washington. 2 million went to Doctors Without Borders. The silence was complete. The oceanfront mansion, Charles continued, was sold to the Oregon State Parks Department for $1 to create public beach access and a nature preserve. By Mrs. Whitman's instruction, it will be named the Garrett Whitman Preserve, honoring the only family member who understood that the best views shouldn't be reserved for those who can afford them. No, Richard whispered. She couldn't have. We're her children. That money was ours by right. Charles opened one final document. There is one more bequest. $1 million remains in a trust with Mr. Garrett Whitman as the sole trustee. This money can only be used to provide medical care and support for any family member who becomes ill and has no one else to turn to. As Mrs. Whitman wrote, Garrett will help even those who don't deserve it because that's who he is. This trust ensures he can afford to keep being himself. The conference room erupted into chaos. Richard lunged across the table, grabbing Charles by the collar. You helped her do this. This is fraud, manipulation, elder abuse. Charles remained unshaken. Security cameras recorded this, Mr. Whitman. I suggest you sit down. Thomas was on his phone with a lawyer, shouting about mental incompetence and undue influence. Michael kicked a chair across the room in frustration. Evelyn sat frozen, pale as paper, desperately recalculating the money that no longer existed. We'll destroy you. Richard pointed at me, finger trembling with rage. I didn't, I said quietly. I didn't steal anything. I had no idea she had arranged any of it. Liar! Thomas bellowed. 3 years living with her, and you expect us to believe you didn't know? Charles Harrington cleared his throat. Mr. Garrett Whitman was never informed of any of these decisions. Mrs. Whitman insisted on that. She wanted his care to be genuine, not influenced by knowledge of any inheritance. There are sealed affidavits from witnesses confirming he was never present for financial discussions. One by one they stormed out, shouting threats that filled the room like smoke. This isn't over, Richard warned. I'll spend everything I have to break this will. Good luck, Charles replied evenly. You'll be fighting the American Cancer Society, 200 scholarship recipients, and the state of Oregon. I'm sure the press will enjoy that story. When they had gone, Charles handed me a sealed envelope. She wanted you to read this alone, he said. I drove to what had once been Grandma Margaret's mansion, now marked with a new sign, Future Home of Garrett Whitman Preserve, opening next summer. Sitting on the bluff where we had watched sunsets, I opened her letter. My dearest Garrett, if you're reading this, Charles has delivered my final lesson to our family. I'm sorry you had to witness their true colors, but you needed to see it. DNA doesn't make a family, love does. The money would have destroyed them. If I'd left them millions, they would have fought over it until lawyers took most. If I'd left them nothing, they would have assumed you manipulated me. So I gave them what they earned, tokens that look valuable but mean nothing. You, on the other hand, earned something real. You didn't want millions. You got the truth. You're nothing like them. You showed up when someone needed you. You get to be the name on something that brings joy to families for generations. The trust isn't really for them. We both know they'll never ask for help. It's for you to use as you see fit, helping those who truly need it. You've been doing it your whole life, usually with far less. Your real inheritance is freedom, from wondering if you're like them, from their poison, from money over love. That choice made you wealthy in ways they'll never understand. Live well, my sweet boy. Build things that last. Love people who deserve it. And remember, the fortune I worked for was only worth something when I gave it to people who'd use it right. All my love, Grandma Margaret. That was 2 years ago. The lawsuits failed, just as Charles predicted. Richard hasn't spoken to me. Evelyn moved to California to reinvent herself. Thomas filed for bankruptcy again. Michael disappeared somewhere in Nevada. Meanwhile, the trust has helped 17 families so far. construction workers whose children battled cancer, a janitor at my company whose wife needed heart surgery, real people with real struggles who finally had someone who cared. Each check I write reminds me of Grandma smiling, knowing she had turned her fortune into something that mattered. Last week the preserve officially opened. Hundreds of families came on the first day. Children built sandcastles where her rose garden had been. Teenagers played volleyball where the fountain once stood. An elderly couple shared sandwiches on a bench, watching the sunset from the same bluff where Grandma and I used to play chess. A little girl ran up to me, pointing at the sign. "Is that you, Garrett?" she asked. "That's me," I said. "Why is your name on the park?" "My grandma wanted everyone to have a beautiful place to enjoy the ocean," I explained. "She believed the best things in life should be free for everyone." "She sounds wonderful." "Is she here?" I looked out at the waves, the families laughing and playing, the joy on faces that would never know Margaret Whitman's name, but would benefit from her final act of generosity and defiance against greed. "Yeah," I said, "she's here." Her legacy wasn't in money or property. It was in love, care, and the freedom to make a difference in the lives of others. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that family isn't defined by blood. It's about who shows up when it matters most. Take a moment to reflect on what true wealth means to you, and remember that the most meaningful inheritance isn't money. It's the certainty that someone truly cared for you, and that you in turn showed up for the people who needed you most.